Hi, everyone, and welcome to our session. We are going to hear today from two fantastic businesses with purpose, showcasing innovation, technologies, and ideas which will focus on helping build a resilient and sustainable food system. Before I start, I wanted to reflect a little bit on the last 2 weeks. And what we've heard at the Food Systems Pavilion is really focused on solutions. But we heard two things on those solutions that I thought was really important. One is we need many of them. There is no silver bullet. We need lots of solutions focused on many different areas across the value chain. The second thing was that there is no single solution that is perfect. They all have some issues that need to be worked through. And we've heard that today. We've heard solutions, and the following 2 weeks, we've heard solutions from supporting small-scale farmers to really at the high-tech end around agri-tech solutions. We've heard a lot about alternative proteins. We've heard about vertical farming. So today we're going to hear from two organizations, Shock Meats, which will be later, and Infarm, a vertical farming company. I think what I want to talk about just before I introduce Arnavaz and Aaron on screen, and it would be great to see them up on screen if we can pull them up, is that vertical farming is a really innovative solution that is creating a climate resilient solution for food security. But it also means that it is producing plants with less impact, so less water, less land, and producing plants 365 days a year, whatever the climate, whatever the weather. But that comes with a cost. It is also a business that has high energy needs for producing those plants. And Arnavaz and Aaron will be talking about how we're addressing that. Vertical farming has an energy challenge, and we'll be talking about how we tackle that energy challenge. Arnavaz is the the Director of Sustainability and Impact at Infarm, and Aaron is the CTO and founder of Supercritical, our partner. Arnavaz will take us through our journey to being the first vertical farming company to set science-based targets. And Aaron will talk about how he's worked with us as a partner around carbon removal, which is one key area. And we'll talk about that journey. So I'm going to hand over to Arnavaz now to take us through your slides. And I think, Arnavaz, you'll be sharing your slides. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Kate, and hello, everyone. Share my screen. It's great to be speaking to you all today and speaking alongside Aaron Randall, a key partner to Infarm for the past 2 years or so. And thank you, Kate, for facilitating this session. I think you raised very important points. It's been a very exciting couple of weeks at the Food Systems Pavilion, highlighting the urgent need for food transformation. For those of you new to Infarm, let me briefly introduce us. We are a vertical farming company operating in 10 countries, working with more than 30 top retail chains and producing millions of plants every month. The Food Systems Pavilion at COP27 has highlighted the urgent need for food transformation. It's made the case that if we don't come up urgently with new and completely different ways of producing food, we won't have a meaningful chance at tackling climate change. We won't have a meaningful chance at food security in our lifetimes. And we will continue to breach the planetary boundaries that safeguard our climate, our biodiversity, and the natural cycles of biogeochemical cycles. So one solution that's emerging is the role of controlled environment agriculture and vertical farming within that sphere. And here's why it's becoming a unique and sustainable way of producing and distributing food. First of all, vertical farming decouples food production from nature degradation. It's a method of producing food that does not contaminate the soil with agrochemicals, does not degrade land, does not convert natural habitats, which is really, really important in the face of climate shocks, in the face of the continued damage to our natural ecosystems that are sustaining life on Earth. It's a resource efficient way of producing food. It uses up to 95% less land, 95% less water, zero chemical pesticides, and it's continuing to use circular models to produce food. Is climate resilient? Food is produced in a highly controlled environment, independent of favorable climate conditions outside. And it's really producing food at a predictable output, at a flexible output with the quality and nutritional value that we need today. Last but not least, it's urban. This is increasingly important because by 2050, 70% of our population will be living in the cities. So this is one of the only ways to ensure we're getting nutritious, high quality, accessible food to the urban population. More importantly, this is important to create overall resilience, climate resilience in the urban environments. But here's the challenge. Today, vertical farming is an energy intensive and carbon intensive business because it's relying on energy to grow its plants, and it's relying on climate control systems and refrigerants. But I would argue that this is only a temporary problem and not a fundamental barrier to the sector becoming a fully sustainable and viable source of food production and an ultimate solution for climate adaptation and food security in the face of climate change, climate shocks, political shocks, public health crises, and loss of damage that has been very well covered in the last couple of weeks. In fact, I would argue that it's an opportunity. If we tackle the climate footprint of vertical farming sector, we can also have a viable climate adaptation mechanism that's going to be increasingly important in the urban environments. At Infarm, we take this very seriously. So we have done the only thing that we think is scientifically viable, that gets us to net zero at the scale and pace necessary to do this meaningfully. We are committing to reduce our emissions by almost half by 2030, and then by 2045, significantly reduce them to get us to net zero. Last week, we announced that we have set and submitted our targets to the Science Based Targets Initiative, making us the first vertical farming company to do that. And now we're working on a climate mitigation roadmap together with our stakeholders and suppliers. These are the 5 major action areas that we're taking to get there. First, and perhaps most important, is energy sourcing. We are now living in very tough energy times. We know that the world is beset by an energy crisis that's coming out of reliance on fossil fuels. So we increasingly need to switch to renewables and low carbon sources of energy. And this is something that we are working towards very seriously. We're currently at 53%, and we're going to increase this to 100% and maintain it. Second is climate control systems. Again, really important because fugitive emissions coming out of the use of refrigerants for climate control systems is an often underestimated and almost hidden source of emissions that we need to talk about and tackle. Refrigerants and fugitive emissions from losses and leaks of refrigerants, they have a really intensive global impact because they have very, very high global warming potential of a scale that's 1,000 times that of CO2 or CH4. So we need to tackle this. We need to switch to refrigerants with lower global warming potential and prevent losses and leaks. Third is crop efficiency. For us, as a sector, crop efficiency also means climate efficiency. So we need to improve the way our crops use space, light, water, and nutrients, ultimately make them more climate efficient. Fourth, supply chain transformation, working with our suppliers to decarbonize the supply chain together, working on transport and logistics, electrifying our fleets. This is also one of the most impactful areas of mitigation because 70% of our emissions are happening in the upstream and downstream, and no vertical farming company will be different. And fifth is carbon removal. So if all of those previous 4 areas are about mitigation, this one is about physically removing emissions from the atmosphere. Those 4 mitigation areas will help us to reduce emissions, but they don't help us undo the emissions that are already in the atmosphere, or the emissions that we will continue to emit, albeit at a declining rate. So we have to invest in really strategic and credible methods of carbon removal. This is why we have partnered with Supercritical, one of the largest carbon removal marketplaces in the world. And here he is to tell you about it himself, Aaron Randall, the CTO and co-founder of Supercritical. Aaron, over to you.
Thanks so much, Arnavaz. Thanks for having me. As a quick introduction to Supercritical, we are a software platform that helps businesses measure, reduce, or remove their climate impact. Arnavaz, sorry, next slide, please. Thank you. So we help businesses measure, reduce, and remove their climate impact. And to Arnavaz's last point, we exclusively sell carbon removal offsets because they're the only legitimate route to net zero. And I want to talk a little bit about why it's so important that companies like Infarm are engaging in carbon removal offsets. But before I do that, I thought it'd be worth stepping back and making a distinction between the two different types of offsets that exist in the market today. So there are conventional offsets and carbon removal offsets. And conventional offsets are projects like clean cookstove projects and forestry protection schemes. And these are projects that prevent other people emitting carbon. But as a business, if you emit a ton of carbon into the atmosphere and you pay for an offset that prevents someone else emitting a ton, your ton of carbon is still out there in the atmosphere warming the planet. And at this late stage of the climate crisis, that is unfortunately not good enough. Then on the other side, we have carbon removal projects. These are technologies like direct air capture that actually pull carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere and lock it away in long-term storage. Conventional offsets are very cheap. You can buy them for as little as $1 an offset, and carbon removal offsets are more expensive. They're sort of $50 to $500 an offset. And the European Commission did a study that showed that 85% of conventional offsets had no climate impact. So the reasons for that are things like fraud or errors and miscalculations in measurements and so on. But the reality is that between these two offset types, conventional offsets are ineffective at best and fraudulent at worst. Next slide, please. I want to talk a little bit more about carbon removal itself. So there are lots of different types of carbon removal in the market, from natural solutions like tree planting through to technological solutions like direct air capture. And natural solutions like tree planting are great because we know how to do them. They're scalable and they're cost effective. We know how to plant trees. The downside with tree planting, as an example, is that it's less durable. And what we mean by that is that it locks away the carbon that it sequesters from the atmosphere for less time. So for example, if a tree burns down or it's logged or it dies, the carbon that tree was holding in its bark is then re-released back into the atmosphere and then continues to contribute to the warming of the planet. Technological solutions on the right-hand side, things like direct air capture, which is a technology with effectively giant fans that extract carbon dioxide out of the air and bury it underground in long-term storage. These technologies are great because they're very durable. That means they can lock away carbon dioxide for tens of thousands of years. But these technologies are very early in their life cycle and they need investment to scale up. And next slide, please. And on that point, there is a real scaling challenge here. The IPCC, the expert UN body on climate change, has modeled out the pathways for us to stay below 1.5 degrees of warming. And that research has shown that we need to be removing 10 billion tons of carbon dioxide every year by 2050. And to date, we've removed just a few 100,000 tons. So we need to scale this carbon removal industry 20,000 times what it is today if we want any hope of staying below that critical 1.5 degrees of warming. And the next slide, please. And there's like a really important role that businesses have to play in this. Most of the net zero guidance today says, as a company, you should reduce 90% of your emissions before removing the last 10% with high quality carbon removal. And reductions are really important. But if every company waits to the point that in 2040, 2045, they're ready to start buying carbon removal, it will be too late. These technologies won't exist at scale. They won't be affordable at scale. And so businesses really have a critical role to play in being early adopters and early investors in these technologies to help bring them down the cost curve. So what should we be doing as businesses? Well, step one is start by measuring your footprint. And we refer to this as stepping on the scales. to understand where you are today, what you're emitting today as a business, what your climate impact today is as a business. Step two then is to set goals, and ideally, if you can, share it with the world. And Infarm's a great example of this. They've set science-based targets to reach net zero by 2045, and they've got a great detailed plan on how they're going to do that. And finally, step three, as I mentioned, is being an early adopter, an early investor in carbon removal. Unlike those $1 a ton conventional offsets that don't do anything, our customers are spending on average $100 a ton on high quality carbon removal offsets. And in this instance, it really is a case of you get what you pay for. And businesses have an obligation to invest in these technologies that we desperately need to avoid the worst aspects of the climate crisis. So I would say, in summary, be more Infarm. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Aaron and Arnavaz. I think we've got 5 minutes, so I'd love to take some questions. If anyone has a question. Have we got a question from the floor? Otherwise, I have one. No, so I'm going to kick off, because one of the things we've heard a lot, and this is for both of you, but perhaps Aaron, we've heard about scaling these solutions. And you talk about carbon removal, which is really, really interesting, but I'd love to know how you think we can scale that, and particularly what the roadblocks you are seeing for scaling solutions like carbon removal.
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, the real scaling challenge is finance. It's having money flowing to these projects. These projects exist today, and one of the things that we're focused on is finding and vetting the best projects that exist in the market, and there are plenty of them. We've vetted more than 200 different removal project types to find the handful that we deem good enough to work with. But as I mentioned, the challenge of scaling then is, once we've identified those projects, is how do we get businesses to spend their cash with those companies to help them improve the technology and have the funds to continue investing in the technology and improving it and bringing it down the cost curve over time. So that's truly the primary challenge here.
Thanks, Aaron. And now a question for Arnavaz is, as Infarm has grown really fast from 1 now to 10 countries, how have you been able to keep up with that on the measurement side, and also engaging stakeholders within the organizations and partners as well? So Arnavaz, to you.
Thank you, Kate. Really important question, because I think, interestingly, one of the biggest barriers to companies doing the right thing on climate is actually having really good data. So we have taken this very seriously from day one, and we have grown our data and measurements, and we have taken very, very pragmatic approaches. Rather than going with a technology solution from day one, we have looked at utilizing our existing systems, working very closely with the entire business. So there's almost no department at Infarm that has not been involved in measurements and calculations together with us. But we've done a really comprehensive job, and ultimately that data visibility is going to be our biggest weapon in tackling the climate footprint at Infarm.
Thanks, Arnavaz. So I have a final question, because we are running out of time. My final question is, working with other vertical farming, the industry itself, because this is a challenge for the industry, but also broader than that with agri-tech. One of the challenges we've seen with entrepreneurs, and heard it here on the stage, is the difficulty with some of the frameworks that we're working within, even science-based targets, perhaps because of these organizations don't have impact, and measuring that is really hard. So just your reflections on the vertical farming industry, but also entrepreneurs trying to get into the agri-tech area and how they work within these frameworks.
I'll have a stab at that first. Again, an important barrier to climate mitigation is the reporting and measurement side of things. We have in the sustainability reporting space lots and lots of different standards, lots of different reporting frameworks, lots of new climate transparency requirements. And it's really hard, especially for startup and scale-up companies, to abide by all of these rules and standards. One thing that we are seeing as really helpful is the increased collaboration in the sector. As vertical farming sector, we have come together in a pre-competitive collaboration and looked at sharing data, looked at how we can take pragmatic decisions on tools and measurements. What are the standards that are most impactful and get us to where we are? So I don't think we should try and comply with all of these standards and adopt them blindly, but we should work very closely together to see what makes sense for the sector and really take step-by-step measures in reporting that ultimately will get us to more visibility about the issues that we can tackle together, ultimately get us to a better place when it comes to climate.
Aaron, do you want to come in, or we have a question from the floor? So.
I guess I would just like to reiterate some of the great stuff that Infarm's doing. I think that, to that point about, to Arnavaz's point about sharing, it's such a great point and so important for our industry. We talk to lots of different businesses that we work with, and there's definitely a fear of greenwashing in this space, of like picking the wrong standard and sharing the wrong goals and investing in the wrong technologies or whatever it may be. And the reality is that we're so far behind in our fight against the climate crisis that we need companies like Infarm to be doing exactly what you're doing, which is standing up here, publishing your goals and saying this is what we're doing. And yes, there'll be some fear of scrutiny there, but the reality is that so many more businesses need to be doing this and actually making it visible and public. And we have to accept that is the right thing to do. And I think, it's a really important challenge for businesses.
Excellent, thanks. We have a question from Viva.
Yes, Aaron, I have one quick question for you as well. I really like the presentation and you show some very interesting technologies. But from the presentation, I understand that some of these technologies are quite large structures, for example, the air capture. And I was just wondering, because I come from the Netherlands and we have some issues there with the as well, windmills. So and from a social point of view as well, what are your expectations? Some microphone issues. What are your expectations of the social support base, also from society's point of view, for implementing those large structures in society?
It's a really great question. And back to Kate's point, which is opening this talk, there's no one single solution that's going to work that's going to solve this problem. There's no one silver bullet for this. And that's true with carbon removal as well. There are lots of different solutions across nature-based and technological that we need to work in tandem to be able to pull 10 billion tons of carbon out of the air by 2050. So they're all different and you can compare and contrast them. Tree planting is popular and easy and well understood, and most people love tree planting. So that's kind of an easy one to talk about. To your point of direct air capture, and is it like for example, an eyesore or take up too much space? Actually, direct air capture is a good example of a technology that you can put it in the right country, in the right place, where it's best right now in countries where the electricity is effectively green right now, and you can kind of, what am I trying to say here? There are different places you can do these different technologies. Direct air capture can exist out in the wilderness, like in a country with green energy. Tree plants can exist near woodlands already. And we've got other projects like algae that can exist in the desert. So there's lots of opportunities to find these technologies all over the world in different places that I don't think necessarily need to have a huge social impact.
Thank you very much. We've run out of time. Arnavaz and Aaron, thank you so much for your insights. It's great to have you here, and thank you to everyone else.